There's a tendency on the internet to get caught up in the negative discourse surrounding a particular topic. It doesn't take long for a game that people have already made their mind up to hate to rack up a large list of hyperbolic content aimed at basking in bitter catharsis. This is not why I've played Suicide Squad, and it's not why I've made a video about it. In fact, the truth couldn't be more different. Missing from the conversation around this game has been a discussion of what was good. So I thought, this is Rocksteady, man. There's got to be something here. It can't be that bad. I managed to play the alpha of the game pre-release, and even then I thought there was enough potential that the game would merit at least some appreciation. But as I played through the full game, I grew to realize how naive it was to think that I was somehow going to see through to something almost no others had. No, the game is seriously flawed from its foundational premise. And regardless of what I or anyone else thinks, the hard fact of the matter is that the game has completely failed. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is, perhaps, the single biggest AAA failure of the past decade, or, at the very least, it's up there. What's worth studying, though, is the reason why. And the answer to that question becomes particularly interesting when considering I wasn't entirely wrong to begin with. There is some good art trapped within the game, and there's no better way to explore this than to look at its presentation. The presentation is, after all, probably the best part of the game, and I genuinely want to praise what I can about what it gets right. A lot of talented work has gone into the final product, and its due credit has been overshadowed by the significant negative press surrounding it, however warranted it happens to be. The element which grounds all of the game's presentation is the open world of Metropolis. Now, I want to talk about this game, really, on its own merit, and so I want to avoid comparing it to the Arkham games if it's not necessary. But for now, I think it's worth pointing out for comparison's sake, just how different in tone Rocksteady's rendition of Gotham has been compared to what they've done with Metropolis. Where Gotham was dark, thick with atmosphere, and, well, gothic, Metropolis is bright and idyllic. It's filled with bronze statues and skyscrapers, making it feel like it's permanently stuck at the golden hour from sunrise to sunset. The mood reflects the patriotic hope of those who live in a city protected by Superman himself. Futuristic Art Deco design has always been a common art style which ties together a lot of renditions of Metropolis, both in the comics and in the Superman animated series. That's series, plural. One of the first ever animated comic book adaptations is Dave Fleischer's 1940 Superman series, which borrowed the optimism and progressiveness from early 20th century Art Deco architecture to reflect the core qualities of Superman's character. Fleischer's series was used by Bruce Timm as the inspiration for the art style of the Superman animated series of the 90s. Superman's identity is inextricably tied to this visual style, and when looked at in a modern context, it's nostalgic. It's recognizably optimistic, but it's also somewhat otherworldly. Much like 2009's Arkham Asylum was like stepping into an episode of Batman the Animated Series, if the intent is to have Suicide Squad's Metropolis feel like it belongs to a familiar Superman identity, and to tell a story about his city and its inhabitants, the execution of the game's visual design is great. This is true both up close and from far back. The city is full of minute details, and they maintain a visual and storytelling consistency. Of course, there are plenty of fan service DC Easter eggs hidden around corners, but from even a more general world design perspective, consider me impressed. There's not a single corner lacking in detail. And apart from some standard set dressing, I don't think I've seen the same asset twice across the city, at least not in any obvious way. The world has no visible seams. From the macro scale, the city has a strong sense of cohesion to it too. Highways and sky rails connect the low-rise urban sprawl to the opulent high-rise business district which towers over the rest of the city. Lex Luthor's fingerprints are also all over the city, so you never forget who has bureaucratic control over Metropolis without ever having to see the man in person. But Suicide Squad's Metropolis, of course, has something else it also has to sell, and that's the utter hopelessness under the threat of Brainiac. And yes, this is also told really well through the world design. Graffiti at street level tells a story of a city who has gone from worshipping Superman to having completely lost that hope. and when standing back, Brainiac's ship is always looming above to let you know there's never a moment you aren't being watched. It's easy to see some purpose in every single slice of the city. Small and large details are, above all else, incredibly dense. I don't need a blacklight to tell that Metropolis is covered in Rocksteady's DNA. And this isn't an open world by the modern definition. It feels more like a buffet of intricate detail. And the small details stand out not just in the open world, but in the performances during the unbelievably well-rendered cutscenes. Rocksteady has always been ahead of the curve when it comes to graphical fidelity, and Suicide Squad is no different. The facial rendering is just about second to none, even in menus where characters are just idly emoting. Whoever they have over there pulling off this technical wizardry needs to go work on a game people actually want to play. Whoa, I'm not supposed to be talking smack yet. Anyway, even beyond the raw graphical eye candy, the art style and character design is enchanting. There's something about Rocksteady's galleries which just hit different, and it's a shame that a lot of fantastic work in this game has been lost in the noise. What truly sells the characters though, is the voice acting. This has already been praised by plenty of people already, and I'm not going to say anything different here. The cast is filled with talent. Tara Strong keeps up a strong performance for Harley Quinn. Bumper Robinson as Deadshot delivers all of his lines with a believable longing for his daughter. Daniel LaPaine hams it up as Captain Boomerang, towing the line of excessive Australian caricature to my Aussie ears, but over the top is what that character needs. And wrestler Samoa Joe's King Shark is, well, King Shark. And then there's the big one. Kevin Conroy simply is Batman for so many people, and he hasn't held back in Suicide Squad. You can tell he really loved playing the character from an angle that rarely gets explored. I think it was a stroke of brilliance to have Batman be the one insulting you over radio comms for the majority of the main campaign, especially in comparison to Brainiac's incessant repetitive drivel you're forced to listen to during the endgame. Sorry, I'm getting off track again. I still have a few more things I want to appreciate before I start talking holistically. One of these is the cinematography. Holy camera angles, Batman, these cutscenes are good. Well, the ones in the first third of the game are anyway. Suicide Squad, for better or worse, adopts the language of cinema for its cutscenes more accurately than even most other AAA single-player narrative games. They usually start absolutely seamlessly, with gameplay transitioning to cutscenes in this elegant passing of the torch, where camera control is swapped over to the game. This was a technique, as far as I'm aware, pioneered by Rocksteady in Arkham Knight, and which has only started becoming more common in AAA games many years later. It's a small touch, but it cuts away at that slight jarringness that separates gameplay and cutscenes, making the narrative experience just that much smoother. Once the cutscenes are in play, the framing, the camera placement, and the animation work are all simply great, and they use the medium creatively at times to make scenes that would otherwise look rough in live action, where the same effect would be difficult without distracting levels of CG. But what struck me most was the sense of scale produced by the framing. As the game is introducing the characters in the squad during the early hours of the campaign, the Suicide Squad members are so frequently placed in the foreground with something absolutely massive in the background, be it Brainiac or the brainwashed members of the Justice League. The game doesn't spare a moment of cutscene work to lay the foundation of the story. The Suicide Squad are outcast underdogs with a mission to take down the Justice League with no hope of success. Does this pay off in the narrative outside of the presentation? I'll get to that, but I can't deny that the early game cinematography pulls its weight here and does set the scene for an engaging premise. On the topic of the cinematic presentation, there's one scene which really impresses me. Early in the game, during its absolute best set piece, you come across the mind-controlled Batman for the first time, but not before you see the aftermath of his brutality against innocents, doing things he would normally not even do to the most deranged of criminals. It takes no words to know immediately, this is not the same Batman we're familiar with. He kills the lights and disappears into the shadows. If you've played the Arkham games before, this whole sequence is a brilliantly uncanny reversal of roles where you finally get to see what it was like to try and avoid getting strung up by Batman. He's the one in control here. But the game isn't done characterizing the new Batman. He takes down each member of the Suicide Squad, one by one, in strategic fashion, and then, as he has the ultimate upper hand, the Batman picks up an actual fucking gun. It's a visual oxymoron if I've ever seen it. The whole scene is lit with a single red light. This is the game at its most atmospheric. And it's this shot here. This is the one I'm talking about. Batman is pointing a gun at Harley just behind the camera. The narrow depth of field transitions from his face down to the gun, and just as the barrel enters the focal point, the trigger is pulled, and time slows down to show the flash enter the shot. He's injured, so he struggles to reach the bullet in time and only just manages to flick it away with the tip of his finger. We cut back to Harley in real time and watch the bullet narrowly miss her. Batman was trying to kill the Suicide Squad, and they weren't the ones who prevented it. Batman then beats down on the Flash, again committing to unbridled brutality, stopping not by his own decision, but by the command of Brainiac. If I felt that Metropolis had even a sliver of hope before, well, this scene immediately snuffed any of that right out. I've watched feature-length movies with Batman in them that across their whole runtime didn't have a single scene which comes even close to this level of mastery. Now, I wish I had more compliments to give to the game here, and while there are still a couple of other cool set pieces later on, everything I've just said only makes what's to come in the rest of the video that much more disappointing. Rocksteady is clearly on their A-game in presentation, as they've always been, so it begs the question as to why so few people talk about these aspects. Well, the thing is, I've basically already covered everything that works in this game. Yes, this is sadly where the glazing ends, because when looking at anything else past this point in the narrative, the tone is completely different. And no, a different tone in and of itself is not the core issue here. It wouldn't make sense if this game had the dark and atmospheric stuff we've already seen in Rocksteady's previous games with Gotham. It's old hat, and it would only lower the contrast for the juxtaposition between Brainiac's invasion and the city's optimism. No, the problem really comes from just how confused the game's tone is. In Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, the tonal dissonance really comes from the writing. Now, honestly, early on, I was actually pretty into the story being told. The game wastes no time in telling the player that the four outcasts you play as really have no place trying to stand up against the Justice League, let alone Brainiac. The presentation continues to do a lot of heavy lifting throughout, but it becomes harder and harder to take the game seriously. To begin with, oh, and by the way, here's my official full spoiler warning, Amanda Waller negs the four members of the squad into all planting bombs into each other's heads. This is a cool scene, and it's a nice introduction to the types of people we're dealing with here, selfish and ambivalent to each other. We then explore the Justice League's Hall of Justice, getting a glimpse of what pre-mind-controlled Batman, Green Lantern, and Superman are like. A bunch of seemingly arbitrary traversal equipment gets chosen for each character, and then we get to step out and see the full scope of the city for the first time, immediately dwarfed by the Skull Ship's tentacles. Captain Boomerang says something I've never heard an Australian say before, and then we get the gilded tour of fucked up Metropolis. Next is that scene with Batman with the gun and the red lights. Yeah, super cool and all, but here's the thing. Once curtains drop on that sequence, all of the characterization for all of the characters is done. Nothing interesting happens from here on out. If you stopped playing the game here, you might actually be thinking, what's the big deal? This actually seems pretty good. The closed alpha playtest for this game ran about 1 month before release, so not really an alpha, but whatever, and the playtest content ended very shortly after this spot. So that's in fact why you might have heard some people being pretty positive on the game pre-release, but they clearly didn't see the rest of the story. In summary, we meet Wonder Woman, one of the few consistently interesting characters in the narrative. We meet Lex Luthor, who dies and then comes back from a multiverse-esque parallel universe. Then it's on to shooting and killing the Flash, shooting and killing Green Lantern, shooting and not killing a picture of Batman, shooting and killing Batman in a cutscene, shooting and killing Superman, and believe it or not, doing some cool traversal challenges to outsmart Brainiac. Yeah, I'm just kidding. You shoot and kill Brainiac. Now, I've put down people who use hyperbole to hate on this game, so for transparency's sake, there's a bit more complexity to what happens in between all of these moments, and I will go into that, but you get the gist. Now, it's worth mentioning here that the general tone of the game is comedic. It plays out a lot like a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, or the game, where all of the core characters riff off each other with quips. The jokes written into this game are genuinely funny at times. I laughed a lot during my playthrough. I don't think I've witnessed this many jokes actually land in a mainstream video game, apart from perhaps Guardians of the Galaxy. And before that, maybe not since Bulletstorm. Comedy is very subjective, but I don't think I'm alone here. I see a lot of people praise this part of the game's writing. At least to a point, because the reason so many jokes do land is not just because of the writing quality, but because of the sheer quantity of quips that the four amigos are constantly shooting out. It's to the point that any of the moments in this game with a semblance of sincerity get completely undermined by one of the unfunny jokes, of which this game also has plenty. This general problem has been criticized to death in modern Marvel movies. Suicide Squad feels stuck in an era before audiences were tired of this writing style, but the game has clearly had this baked in for a long time, and the lengthy delays this game has received certainly didn't help. What this means for the characters is that, apart from a few of the moments I talked about early on in the game, they don't get to be sincere. Instead, they approach every single event in the game with this ironic detachment. It's weird, because in the early part of the game, all of the Suicide Squad members have some kind of particular flaw or baggage that the game needs to point out. It doesn't want you to miss that Harley Quinn is still processing everything that happened with the Joker in the previous games, and also that she holds a pretty strong grudge against Batman. There's this whole thing with Captain Boomerang that he's convinced himself that he's famous, even though he's clearly not. He's essentially a delusional narcissist, and it gets brought up often and specifically, and not always strictly for a joke. Deadshot brings his historic connection to his daughter, and he mentions frequently that he's only committed to the mission for the purpose of shortening his sentence and seeing his daughter again. Then there's King Shark. He has the least amount of characterization, and whatever, he's the least human out of the group, but his thing is that he feels a right to exercise his power and blood right by ruling over a kingdom. All of these character traits are established in the first couple of hours of the game, but they all go to the same place: nowhere. There's also the group dynamic, which is its own character itself, and starts off as a bunch of people forced to work together who begrudgingly choose to put their differences aside to get the job done, but only since there's something in it for themselves. The opening freeze-frame cinematic encapsulates this better than even most of the explicit exposition. Unfortunately, the trend continues, and this dynamic goes nowhere as well. Every single character, and the way that the characters interact with each other, is exactly the same at the start of the game as it is at the end. And in between those 2 points, none of the characters feel explored at all. All of their traits are extremely superficial, which really kinda defeats the purpose of using established characters in a cooperative live service game in the first place, doesn't it? And when it comes to the side characters, things are no better. In the story, we meet people with fundamental significance to the Arkham universe, like Penguin and Poison Ivy. When these characters are introduced because of their legacy, the impression is that they're going to play some kind of role in the story. For example, when you meet Ivy for the first time, there's an interesting dynamic between her and Harley, since Ivy died in Arkham Knight and has been born again, forgetting everyone from her past. So Harley has this completely unreciprocated connection with Ivy, which is a pretty compelling narrative thread if you ask me. So where does this thread go? Exactly as far as Ivy becoming a vending machine from which to buy elemental afflictions for my weapons. No more, no less. This approach is cynical, not cool. Whenever I'm in the Hall of Justice upgrading or crafting weapons, it feels like I'm being tricked into buying stuff, even though it doesn't actually cost me any real money. It just feels condescending to be served gameplay slop from these well-established characters who I know can be infinitely more interesting. And if that seems bad, don't ask me about the Justice League. Because 3 of the members, Green Lantern, Batman, and Superman, are mind-controlled from the beginning. You never get to see them speak a single word of their own mind at any point in the story, except for a brief recording of Batman. As for the Flash, he does get to deliver some actual character in the opening of the game, but it's not long before he becomes a moustache-twirling villain either. There's an uncanny feeling to watching these characters which, from a visual standpoint, have been designed like the character artists' families depended on it, yet deliver absolute expository drivel for the entire game, completely devoid of any narrative weight. Like, honestly, it kind of messed with my brain watching these cutscenes, because I've never seen such a wide gap between the quality of various design elements in a video game character in my life. It might feel like this comes about because these characters have been written into a corner. The narrative dictates that we be thrown straight into the Brainiac invasion, immediately stripped of any hope. But then one of the scenes makes a jarring decision to have the Flash divulge some personality after he's been mind-controlled by having him speak while bound by Wonder Woman's lasso of truth. If this was possible the entire time, why is it relegated to the Flash, who we've already seen talk? To give some credit to the game in this area, there are a significant catalogue of audio logs which include some conversations between the pre-mind-controlled League, detailing the lead up to the invasion. But listening to these, I just felt disappointed that some of the most interesting dialogue in the game takes place behind unlockable world-building material, instead of in the actual main story. Now, a story told through 5.5 hours of cutscenes, that's 0.15 Assassin's Creed Valhalla's for those keeping track, doesn't need a dozen characters to be fleshed out each with their own complex arcs. This isn't the intention of the game's narrative, and I don't expect it to be. But there's a strange amount of effort which goes into evoking all of the visual elements of established characters and giving them a decent amount of screen time, but ultimately being completely style over substance in the most distracting way I've ever witnessed. The lasso scene has a lot of weight to it though. It's where the practical reality of the whole situation butts up against Wonder Woman's optimistic view that the Justice League is still savable. Barry tells her that the only way to stop the invasion is to kill the rest of the Justice League. This is where good performance capture pays off, because you can see in Diana's face that she doesn't want to believe this, but whether she wants to or not, she accepts it. And she especially doesn't want to admit that the Suicide Squad was right. Wonder Woman is easily the most interesting character in the narrative, and consistently becomes the exception to the empty characterization that the rest of the Justice League gets. She remains under her own cognitive control for the whole run of the story, and thank God for that, because she's the only vessel in the game through which we get to see the ethos of the Justice League contrasted against the Suicide Squad, and as a result, Wonder Woman as a character sits at the interface of what the game is trying to achieve narratively. First of all, she highlights the ostensive insignificance of the squad, and thus their potential as underdogs who might buck the expectations forced upon them. This dynamic makes it easier to root for a bunch of villains, and find satisfaction in their growth as characters. Not that there really is any though. But secondly, she represents the classic optimistic heroism of the Justice League. The Suicide Squad, despite being improperly equipped for the task, take down the Justice League in spite of the hope Wonder Woman has that she can somehow save them instead. They don't have to work around the constraint of optimism that can ultimately hold back those bound by altruism. The game stares every single superhero trope directly in the face and says, get fucked. Suicide Squad's best story moments after this first act are these interactions with Wonder Woman. But, and there are a lot of buts when it comes to this game, there is no payoff. The constant alluding to that the game does towards these two narrative aspects makes it feel like it's thinking about saying something, but it ultimately doesn't commit to either. This non-committal is the biggest weakness of the writing. Almost every interesting moment in the game gets cut off to insert an annoying joke. Annoying not because they're unfunny, well, sometimes, but mostly because they undercut a scene which might otherwise have had some proper gravity to it. It never gets worse than during the Wonder Woman-Superman fight, where two actual gods are battling it out. We're witnessing Diana's attempt at saving the world, aided by the Justice League's heroic philosophy. And when we cut to the reaction of our main characters, the tone gets completely obliterated by Captain Boomerang in an ice cream truck. I still don't know what the point of this was. Then, later in this story moment, Wonder Woman finally commits to killing the League in a last-ditch effort to save Metropolis from Superman by shoving kryptonite into his chest. But she dies in the process, and Superman manages to get away and recover. This scene is, half of the time, treated with sincerity, and the other half of the time, played for some jokes. The tonal clash pretty much destroys the emotional weight that it feels like the writing wants for Wonder Woman's death. When none of the scenes can handle holding on to a sincere moment, the themes are left non-committal and without payoff. Trying to tell a sincere story in a video game with a comedic tone isn't the issue here. Just play the Guardians of the Galaxy game, totally underrated by the way. It manages to essentially be a comedy, but always in service to its themes and character arcs, not in spite of them. And when it tries to do properly emotional scenes, it treats the mood with respect and lets its characters be emotional without any ironic detachment. In the broad strokes of the story in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, this is what really makes it feel unimpactful when the credits roll. I mean, it's not the only thing, but the core of the narrative has no structure. This style of writing has trend chasing stamped all across it, and it disappointingly tugs away and unravels the threads of the narrative which otherwise have some potential. What I see more commonly criticised though is the lack of reverence the game has for its Justice League characters. This usually seems to come from a frustration that the villain protagonists of the story have no respect for the League at all, killing them all in cold blood, and often going the extra mile to do some weird shit to them before or after they're dead. Now, this is a personal thing since all these characters are established in comics and movies, but it has to be understood that the whole premise of the game is that you play as a bunch of villains. Not anti-heroes, not criminals trying to reform themselves, straight up villains. That's no excuse not to make them complex, relatable characters, but the Suicide Squad's whole core concept is that they are principally against heroes, whether they have turned super evil or not. So Captain Boomerang almost pissing on the Flash, let me be clear, while weird, is at least consistent with the eccentric tone of the game, and it's consistent with the character. If the Suicide Squad was not so sacrilegious towards the League, one could just as easily argue that it would be disrespectful to the main characters instead. What's actually disgraceful to the Justice League is that the plot itself has no reverence for the characters. Not because it's made them evil, in fact switching the traditional heroes into the antagonists is a really interesting role reversal, but it's instead because they're not written as actual characters at all, just puppets through which Brainiac speaks. Ultimately, it makes me ask why use this world and these characters for the game in the first place. Now, as much as I talk about the lack of any seriousness in the tone of a game trying to present what feels like are serious ideas, there is one scene towards the end of the story which in fact does feel like it's trying to be sincere for a moment. Yes, that moment. In order to lure out Superman, who is the last of the corrupted Justice League undealt with, the Suicide Squad bring an apprehended Batman out to the middle of Metropolis. While they're waiting, evil Batman tries saying a few words before being cut off by Harley Quinn, who goes off on a monologue about how people like herself and the rest of the Suicide Squad have to endure the mental and emotional damage from superheroes like Batman. For a very rare moment, the game actually stops all of the jokes, pauses the tonal whiplash just for a moment so that it can deliver this scene with some actual gravity. At the end of the monologue, Harley pulls out a gun, setting up a frame which mirrors the one at the beginning of the game where it was Batman holding a gun towards her. But here, we get to look at Harley, and there's no one coming to stop the bullet. With the camera held squarely on her face, she pulls the trigger, and we're left to sit with the reaction she has to the bittersweet victory. So, the game wants us to take this scene seriously. This is actually the last time anything with emotional weight happens in the story, so this is really the emotional climax of the game. But to me, it doesn't even come close to landing. The callback to Batman's upper hand against the Suicide Squad contrasts against the present moment where we see the Suicide Squad has, against all the odds, beaten the Justice League. This is one of the core elements of the narrative, the success of the underdogs. But how do they manage to succeed here? Well, it's not because of any growth in the characters. Harley hasn't changed since the initial interaction with Batman. It's not a change in the group dynamic either. This moment ignores the other three members in the squad, only Harley is involved in the emotional catharsis. What makes this execution fall so flat in the context of the wider narrative is that earlier on we actually get to see Batman himself talk about how he could be taken down if he ever were to go rogue. To capture Batman in the first place, the Suicide Squad had to find and enter the Batcave, and in doing so, come across a recording that Batman took of himself outlining how to take down the Justice League in case they turned. To take down the Batman, he says the only way to succeed is to work together as a team, a prudent message given that the Suicide Squad don't.
the team you lead, the family you choose. Together, you'll be formidable.
Immediately after that, the team gets split up in a fear and toxin-induced Scarecrow-esque sequence, which tries to throw off the player in an impactful way like in the Arkham games, but only ends up drawing a comparison which is drastically unfavourable to Suicide Squad. But worse than that was having the team be split up, yet still managing to take down Batman. It kind of makes the whole teamwork theme fall down on itself. Harley does take the lead here and commands the squad to put together some retaliating fear toxin, which helps to take Batman down. But the teamwork boils down to blindly trusting Harley's vague plan, and from the gameplay side, the game falls into the most isolated it ever gets, accomplishing the complete opposite to making it feel like you're working together. And it doesn't help that the boss fight here is mechanically the blandest in the game. Then, between this point in the story and the death of Batman, no team growth happens at all. So when the trigger is pulled, it doesn't feel like there's a payoff to any of the themes of the game, and the moment loses any feeling of being earned. Let me reiterate, the premise here is not the problem, it's solely the execution. And the performances are not part of the problem either. Let me address the elephant in the room here. Part of the vast discourse around this game is that it represents some kind of disgrace to Kevin Conroy's legacy. This isn't a topic I particularly want to spend time on, but I think it's worth mentioning that, firstly, a legacy is built up over years and is not defined by a single piece of work. But more to the point, no one is able to make that kind of call apart from Kevin himself and those who actually know him. By all public accounts, Kevin enjoyed his role in Suicide Squad. The most disrespectful thing one can do is to speak on behalf of someone who is not able to speak themselves. Ultimately, he accepted the role, and that's that. Anyway, this point in the narrative does signify one of its weakest moments, only because it feels so earnest, yet so empty. And it really doesn't get better. After shooting Superman into another unceremonious death, Brainiac is still left, so it's off to Earth 2, a different parallel universe for some reason, to kill one of his 13 bodies. And when we get there, he's just a purple version of the Flash. Then we take him to Waller and blast his head. The credits haven't even rolled yet, but the game's final sequence feels so uncoordinated and lacking in any closure whatsoever. In fact, it couldn't feel more open. Not only because of the other 12 Brainiacs we still need to kill to have an ongoing live service, but because the game explains very little of the vague circumstances of the endgame's narrative. Why does the Skull ship partially explode when we kill a different universe's Brainiac? Is there a Brainiac on the original Earth at all? And how did we decide to go for Earth 2's Brainiac specifically? Then, in all that confusion, the credits finally roll, and any wisps of emotion that the story might have had after the final deaths of Batman and Superman are overshadowed by confusion. The game's ending is it awkwardly fumbling around in an attempt to justify a business model, not a narrative. The story is literally missing an ending, something typically considered quite crucial when it comes to writing. Now, let me give a bit of benefit of the doubt for a second. Clearly, the plan for the game is, or well, at some point has been at least, to continue telling a serialized story across consistent game updates to justify its live service. An okay idea, I guess, and to get specific, there are genuine leaks of already recorded voice lines which point to the future of the game's story having the Justice League return as their regular selves, which would be massive for the story. It would address some of its main criticisms, but frankly, what exists at launch for the full AAA price is not good enough. What links together a lot of failed live service AAA launches is relying on the promise that one day the game will be good. So the connection between the narrative and the live service nature of the game is parasitic. The traditional narrative has suffered in order for the game to be set up to run indefinitely. And I wish that the ending was the only part of the game's story which took a hit to prop up its business model. The missions in between the story beats consist of doing chores for the one-dimensional side characters in the Hall of Justice. For example, Hack needs me to help her hack some alien 5G towers in order to do something. it's never even tangentially clear how these busy work missions impact the core objectives to eventually kill the Justice League and finally take down Brainiac. They stick out so bleedingly obviously as padding for the campaign. This is a problem not even the Avengers had, making the live service model of Suicide Squad feel so uncomfortably stapled on compared to even the most egregious examples of soulless live service AAA IPs of the past. So then, it's up to the gameplay to justify all of the missions in between the story beats. Combat in the game combines traversal mechanics with shooting combat in what is admittedly a pretty unique way. It could be compared to Sunset Overdrive, Just Cause, or Crackdown, but Suicide Squad certainly does its own thing to make its approach feel mechanically fresh by having tight movement mechanics with depth be a crucial aspect to combat. The main gameplay loop consists of initiating a mission in the open world, clearing out some enemies in combat, and getting some rewards for the mission. The mission design, however, is bafflingly uninspired. There are about 7 or 8 extremely basic mission templates which all boil down to the exact same thing. Use your character to shoot at some bad guys. The mechanical design does all of the heavy lifting in gameplay because missions have practically zero variation, and enemy design is similarly diverse. Then, when we finally finish a mission, the looter-shooter template acting as the game's foundation rears its ugly head in the form of the mission complete screen. I can usually see the good in even the most questionable decisions, but I cannot stress enough just how much I hate this part of the game. They all play out like this. You complete the mission. Then, the game just stops for a few seconds. This is unskippable. The words "Mission Complete" come up on the screen before fading away a few seconds later. Also unskippable. One of 2 character animations play out. Thank fuck, this is skippable. Then any progression information is shown in tab 1. You can then switch over to tab 2, where an animation of a penguin decorated bat pod containing your mission rewards crashes into the ground and slowly opens. This is unskippable. The first reward will show up on screen, and while subsequent reward visuals are skippable, the first one is not. Then, finally, it's possible to move to tab 3, the report tab, where an unskippable quip from one of the other characters is played while you watch your character model just stand there. And then, you select whether you want to keep staying in the menu to spend skill points or modify your build, or move back into the open world. Isolated, it's not too irritating. However, missions are short and frequent, so this screen will come up several times an hour. Or, if you're grinding out missions, more like a dozen times an hour. What happens is that the pacing of the game gets completely screwed up. This affects the pacing of the gameplay and the pacing of the narrative during the main campaign, giving a stilted staccato feeling to the overall flow of Suicide Squad. Unless you're obsessively involved in frequent build changes, all you want to do anytime this mission complete screen comes up is to skip it. Skip all of it. I don't know how this got through playtesting. Even in the context of a live service looter shooter, I'm still scratching my head about the pacing of the reward screen, because the series of slow, unskippable screens of unimportant text and animations stand in between the unclimactic end of the mission and the acquisition of the rewards. Unlike most other games in the genre, there is no way to physically pick up or similarly interact with loot. It all happens in menus. It divorces the game's missions and the gameplay from the loot rewards, weakening the association between the two. So it doesn't even feel as satisfying as it should to grind out missions, even if that's the kind of thing you're into. Whether you're grinding out missions or just cruising around in the open world, one thing you'll be using a lot of is the game's traversal. Combat is at its best when it's requiring you to be really mobile. Enemies often group up behind shields, so you're having to position yourself for good lineups consistently. And while all of the characters are most unique in their movement mechanics, all of them feel consistently satisfying to maneuver around combat arenas. Movement is globally very snappy, and it doesn't take long to become intuitive. For example, Harley Quinn's pendulum swing allows her to move around efficiently with momentum, but it also allows for good stationary positioning by hanging from a good vantage point out in the open. As you get better, you can start incorporating slides and hops into combat traversal, making it easier to deal damage on the move while avoiding getting shot yourself. Outside of missions though, open world traversal is a bit more inconsistent. Let's actually have a look at the movesets. Harley Quinn is able to swing from a bat glider with a grapple and uses momentum to carry herself forward. Ledgers can also be grappled onto to get a boost of momentum. Everyone has a traversal stamina bar, and for Harley, she can only swing if the bar is full. In the open air, every grapple causes the bar to fill more slowly until you touch a surface. So you end up getting very creative about optimal pathfinding, to touch surfaces often enough to keep up stamina, but without taking too long a path that it slows you down too much. The bar also fills up faster when you dive mid-air, so what happens is a constant conversion of momentum that feels intuitive and fluid. Deadshot is simpler, but similar in that he's completely bound by momentum. He uses his jetpack to move around in 3 dimensions, can move faster with afterburners to use up stamina more quickly, and has one mid-air reset of stamina that can be optimized by timing the reset just before running out. This is all straightforward, but it works well. Movement is always engaging across all characters, but it doesn't always feel as fluid. King Shark, for example, moves by leaping high or far, but in the air he feels very floaty. So to get around in the open world, he needs to dash in the air or dive to the ground very frequently, 2 movements which completely reset momentum. And Captain Boomerang uses a Speed Force enhanced boomerang to teleport short distances. But because all of his movement outside of sprinting involves throwing an object in whatever direction you want to go, then teleporting to that position, playing as him is just constant momentum resetting. He also hangs in the air after a teleport dash, making the whole system feel floaty for him as well. The reason for this open space traversal inconsistency is because movement needs to first and foremost be fit for combat, where there needs to be enough time to line up shots mid-air. And there is. What feels floaty in the open world is actually great for combat. The result though is certain characters feeling more natural to use to explore the open world, and it's not for the purpose of characterization through a moveset, but instead it comes off like an accidental consequence of the combat design. Where things really start to feel cynical, and yes, all roads do seem to lead to cynicism here, is the more broad lack of characterization that all of the squad members get through their gameplay mechanics. Everyone has already said their bit about how ridiculous it is that 3 of the main characters here, which are not known for gunslinging, have their core combat toolset being guns. So I'm going to skip that. One might hope though that traversal handles this problem a little bit better. But it doesn't. In the opening, each of the characters chooses their traversal kit completely arbitrarily, and in such an offhand way, it's like they're knowingly winking at the camera to say, what does it matter? So generally, even the movement kits of these characters feel unmotivated, except perhaps for King Shark. And to take it one step further, the traversal gameplay sometimes even utterly fails to characterize the movement toolset itself. Out of the 4 characters, which one would you expect gets around the quickest over long distances? If you said the guy with the Speed Force gauntlet, you would be wrong. He's not the second fastest either. Captain Boomerang is consistently the slowest to move across large distances. The thing is, he is snappy in combat. In the open though, in order for positioning to be precise, he doesn't teleport quickly. You spend most of your time aiming his boomerang instead of moving. So the aesthetics of speed in Captain Boomerang's movement mechanics don't translate through to the gameplay, let alone the character traits of the actual character himself. He is the worst for this, but the others don't fare much better either. When contending with established characters, it naturally feels like something crucial is missing when there's no synergy between their gameplay design and their character. This game doesn't make me feel like Captain Boomerang. What it kind of feels like, and this is half speculation, is that Rocksteady had a different original game as the foundation, and after the core gameplay mechanics were mostly decided on, the project got shifted to incorporate the Suicide Squad and the Arkhamverse. In terms of evidence, Jason Schreier has reported on some development details mentioning that Rocksteady was working on an original multiplayer game after Arkham VR. At the same time, WB Montreal, the studio behind Arkham Origins and the more recent Gotham Knights, was working on a Suicide Squad game, but that project got shifted from WB Montreal to Rocksteady. So it's not a stretch to think that a lot of Suicide Squad's final gameplay design was intended for a completely different set of original characters who would have been designed around their gameplay, not the other way around. And a retrofitted game is exactly what this feels like, both in the movement mechanics and in the combat design. But let's turn to the combat, since just because it might feel derivative that a bunch of established eccentric supervillains all use guns as their core toolset, that doesn't mean that the combat is inherently bad. So the way it works is, well, you aim at the bad guys and shoot. There are a few complications woven into a basic shooter framework to make it unique and, I guess, somewhat interesting. One of my favourite things is the active reload. I could talk about this system on its own endlessly. It's fantastic design which is unfortunately uncommon. It rewards good timing and adds a layer of engagement to whatever shooting system it's paired with, but it lacks any punishment for mistakes. It's all upside and it's satisfying to use. All of this is true in Suicide Squad. Another complication is that occasionally, enemies will telegraph these relatively strong attacks accompanied by lightning bolt symbols around them. Look familiar? Anyway, any weapon can shoot an alt-fire counter-bullet which shuts down the counterable attack and deals a lot of damage. If you have the right build, you can get some strong effects from countering as well. Another core element of combat is the combo meter. This goes up, generally, from killing an enemy, and stronger enemies can make it go up by more than one. The higher your combo, the more buffs start to be applied to your character based on your skill tree selection. It caps at 50, which is where the most powerful skills will activate, so maximizing combo quickly and efficiently is a crucial part of succeeding in high-level missions. The combo system is also looking pretty familiar. Yes, Suicide Squad actually borrows a lot of combat design from the Arkham games, funnily enough. Rocksteady created a hugely influential combat style, so it makes perfect sense that they would try to roll this into Suicide Squad as well. But while it does introduce elements to the combat loop which are unique, that translation doesn't go nearly as well as it does on paper. First of all, most enemies launching a counterable attack on you are far away, which means it takes time to line up the shot, and often this is only to shut down and damage a single enemy. What this means is you have to stop focusing on the enemies nearby to you, which kills your DPS. It's actually not that common that countering an attack is the optimal move. As for the combo meter, we know it goes up with kills, but how does it go down? Well, if you don't shoot anyone for long enough, it resets to 0. Makes sense. If you get shot, you'll lose a portion of your combo, so you might go from a ×50 to a ×40 by taking a hit. This also makes sense, but in practice, it doesn't feel good to play at all. Firstly, because you lose your combo after not killing anything for a while, playing any encounter with sparse enemies, which happens more than you would think, makes it incredibly easy to frequently lose your combo, not through the feedback of making a mistake, but because the game is not giving you enough to work with in the first place. Secondly, because there's always so much going on during combat, on the screen, in the UI, and behind the camera, you rarely even notice yourself getting hit. When I lose a portion of my combo from damage, more often than not, I notice it some unknown time later after I've been hit and just wonder, when the fuck did that happen? In aggregate, there is little to no feedback between your gameplay input and your combo. Suicide Squad is its own game, and I want to fundamentally judge it on its own merits. However, having all of the aesthetics of Arkham combat is an unlucky comparison to invite, since simplicity is what Arkham combat's greatest strength was, and this is the polar opposite. It misses everything which made that system satisfying to play, that being the extremely tight, readable system that clearly rewarded skilled gameplay and punished player mistakes. It's clear they've tried to translate some of what worked from Arkham, but fundamentally, the looter-shooter framework doesn't slot into the kind of gameplay design Rocksteady is known to be adept at. Different characters do get access to a unique combination of gun types. For example, Harley can use SMGs, pistols, and machine guns, whereas Captain Boomerang can only use shotguns, snipers, and SMGs. But despite the fact that you can choose from a limited range of weapon types, all combat encounters feel the same across all characters. enemies often group up and they always move behind these shields, so you're really only fighting enemies in medium to short range encounters. Snipers are only properly useful for taking down helicopters, otherwise they're extremely situational. To go along with this, the game also gives all characters a melee attack and some grenades for dealing with enemies up close. But bafflingly, 2 of the characters' melee attacks only half work. The main reason to melee an enemy, outside of harvesting shields, is because you can follow up with critical attack shots. But the camera is effectively broken when you use it with Harley or King Shark, because their melee attacks are extremely close range. About 50% of the time, the camera will correctly track the enemy post-melee, and the other half of the time, it tracks the enemy's invisible cousin half a meter away. I ended up only using melees for these characters when I absolutely needed shield resources, not when I wanted to shoot enemies for critical damage. This game was in development for 6 to 7 years, so again, this is something else where I have no idea how it got past playtesting. On its own merit, the combat is ultimately a very mixed bag, and it isn't helped by the encounter design. There are fundamentally 3 enemy types: grunts, brutes, and vehicles. The game tries to make it feel like there's more variation by adding in enemies infused with the powers of certain Justice League members like the Flash or Batman. But functionally, they change nothing about your approach to combat. In my playthrough, due to some bug I think, I never even got to see the tutorial screen explaining how Invisible Batman variant enemies actually work, so for the entire game, up until I did some extra research for this video, I thought invisible enemies were a bugged enemy. Yes, I thought an actual real intentional enemy design in the game was a glitch for my entire playthrough. To say the enemy variants enhance the gameplay in any way would be the overstatement of the year. So, for the most varied of missions in the game, it'll go something like this. If you see a grunt, shoot them, or if they're in a group, throw a grenade. If you see a brute, dump your grenades and use your suicide strike ability to maximize damage, because using them on anything else is just a waste. If you see a vehicle, shoot the glowing purple orbs, and if it's a tank, also dump your grenades. There we go, that's the checklist for any combat encounter in a mission. The singular optimal approach for each situation funnels the gameplay into the same motions for any mission you do, and despite some appreciable mechanics, the result is a very bland loop. The interesting bumps and sharp edges of combat that should be able to keep you at least somewhat engaged are completely sanded off by the encounter design. Now, I've admittedly gone on about my criticisms for the combat for a while now, but I still haven't got to the worst part yet. Damage numbers, status effect symbols, shield level indicators, overabundant UI information, and an array of particle effects of which only God knows the origin all fill the screen at the same time, making all of the information the game is trying to communicate completely unpassable. Yeah. Forget trying to track where your combo loss just came from, trying to figure out where the enemies even are is an impossible task when the visual noise is at its worst. Oh, and those symbols down in the bottom left that tell me which of my skills are active? Gun to my head, I couldn't tell you what a single one of those for any of the characters means at all. The obscene amount of brain-scrambling visual noise only gets worse and worse the higher level of play that you get to. This is just straight up, unadulterated bad design. TikTok Brain is no excuse. This simply isn't functional. Rocksteady was not the right studio to make a game in this genre. The gameplay loop is held together by duct tape and superglue to a generic live service looter shooter template design. There are so many elements that feel like they've been added for the sake of it, to give the feeling of a looter shooter without actually considering whether it achieves the goals of an engaging shooter in the first place. I mean, for the entire game, I'm looking at all of these ammo pickups from enemies, but why? Never once in my entire playthrough, in the endgame or otherwise, did I even have to think about ammo once. I never even came close to running out. It's one of dozens of game elements added to contribute to the attention-sucking orgy of numbers constantly on screen. Or what about how the endgame is supposed to be this constant grind of combat missions? Yet, if I play as Captain Boomerang, in order to play optimally, I have to watch his exact same laborious suicide strike animation over and over again. It was cool the first few times, but the game can't decide whether it wants to be principally cinematic or give you a seamless, endless combat loop. The ultimate weakness of this game is not that it is a looter shooter, but the fact that it fails to integrate its live service looter shooter formula into a functional experience. It was crucial that this game innovated on the approach which failed so many games before it if it wanted to have any hope of performing at all. The artistic elements of the game, both good and bad, are all undermined by the template holding it together. Having Nolan North's penguin insult me while I'm crafting guns doesn't give the vibe that I think the studio was going for, because I just feel condescended. Even the parts of the narrative that are strong become diluted through the lens of a numbers go up looter shooter with a lack of grounding for its world. And if the game were good, whatever that means, then selling this game would still be an uphill battle. As far as I'm aware, the cross-section of the player base who are interested in single-player story-driven action games, and the player base who sticks around on a live service offering for many years at a time are not a strong overlap. And the existing hardcore live service players who will stick around are a limited resource. Let me be clear about this. I think criticizing a lack of innovation can be an unfair thing to do. It can lead to a derivative feeling product, but work can also be perfectly good in its own right without having innovated in any particular area. See the Horizon games, for example. But this problem isn't so simple for live service games. They exist within pretty much the most competitive gaming market, so it's puzzling to see so many games use the bog standard looter shooter template and bring nothing significantly new to the table. There are so many extremely healthy and well-supported live services to choose from, many of which are completely free. To make a narrative-centric game work on a live service model, it needed to do something truly special, given that the standard approach demonstrably does not work at all. And Suicide Squad, unfortunately, stuck to that model like it was the magic formula. On the other side, a game like Helldivers manages to do something somewhat new in the live service space and has been massively successful as a result. It has a narrative, but it's told through abstract space politics, where you play as an expendable soldier doing incremental work to uphold the democracy of Super Earth. And what do you do in the gameplay? You run into battle ready to exercise your expendable nature to move the incremental needle of democracy. The narrative framework suits the aesthetics of the gameplay design, and people can easily buy into that. Oh, and it helps that the game is massively fun as well. Please check out this video from Questmarker, whose video on this aspect of Helldivers is simply great. If you like it, consider subscribing as well. I have no affiliation, he's just one of my favourite small-time YouTubers. Going back to Suicide Squad, in contrast, it hasn't even justified its own existence. What it's ended up being is not a game for single-player narrative players because the story content is thin and incomplete, nor hardcore looter shooter fans, since there's nothing novel to bring people over or create a community. One might hope, at the very least, the loot and build variety would work in this game given its foundational model. And while the game does have okay build variety, it's hampered by how uninteresting that variety is. Builds ultimately boil down to an incremental numbers game. The skill tree in Suicide Squad, for all of the characters, is a convoluted mess. The effect of any one upgrade in the tree is obfuscated by the overwhelming number of minor percentage point variations and conditional statements. Take a look at this King Shark skill unlock, verbatim. At 20 times combo and higher, performing a shield harvest has a 100% chance to make another enemy within 10 meters shield harvestable. This can only happen once every 30 seconds. Jesus Christ, how is anyone meant to understand what is going on in their build if this is how half of the skill upgrades read? Let me try and be fair again. This skill is ultimately pretty simple. If you want to focus on building your shield at a quick rate, put this on and forget. But in aggregate, it makes trying to put together a build an overwhelming process. A system like this will only appeal to a very narrow branch of hardcore spreadsheet build makers. There's nothing wrong with that, But then I'm baffled once again, because where does tying this game's story-focused world in the DC IP, and specifically the Arkhamverse, all fit into that? It's like every element in this game is competing with another, an Ouroboros of self-sabotaging game mechanics. Even if you manage to work out all of that mess of a skill tree, the build system just does not work. It feels marginally different at best to play with two different build varieties. I did manage to set up a Harley build which focused on collecting shield resources from grenade throws, and where all of my counters also made enemies drop grenade resources. But I suppose to keep the game balanced, the effects were so insubstantial, the bulk of the gameplay still boiled down to the exact same motions, making this purposefully designed build feel no different from if I'd just thrown darts to select my skill and build items instead. So the appeal of the endgame is washed out against a loot and build system which carries very little satisfaction with it. Oh, and if you thought the mission variety was bad in the campaign, just wait until you see what the endgame has to offer. Remember those 8 or so missions I mentioned? Well, only 3 of those contribute towards any progress in the endgame. Once the first of 13 Brainiacs is dead, the endgame begins, and you can kill the same enemies in either an Ivy mission, a wave killing mission, or a crystal destroying mission. That's it. 3 10-minute missions ad infinitum. Well, that, or you can once again fight the same enemies in an endless horde mode, which itself isn't even that fun because of how annoyingly sparse enemy placements are. Rocksteady had one chance to prove that its promised future updates would come with compelling narrative content and mission variety to alleviate this. Episode 1 came out 2 months after release. It contained a new character, the Joker, whose narrative content amounted to, fittingly, a joke. If you wanted to see how Harley might react to a version of the Joker given her past, well, bad luck. He just gets horny with Captain Boomerang instead. That's the only cutscene he's in, and it progresses the main story by exactly 0. If the launch state of the game was the writing on the wall, then the seasonal updates are its fate being sealed. This game is what it is, and there's no signs that it's gonna get any better. The problems are baked into the core design. For the players who did genuinely buy into Suicide Squad, many feel that their support has been for an insubstantial roadmap lacking in the right type of content needed to improve the game. When I was playing through the endgame though, what probably exhausted me more than the limited gameplay and mission variety was actually the environmental variety. Turns out, all endgame content doesn't even take place in the already visually refined city of Metropolis. Instead, it's in bland, empty grey and purple craters inside of an alternate reality. It might seem like a crazy decision to make when Metropolis is sitting right there. And there it is, the reason why nothing in this game feels like it's supposed to be there. The big, empty endgame mission spaces are that way because combat demands big open areas. It needs to be easy to maneuver about. Like I mentioned, movement is a huge part of combat. Despite the moderate size of the main city, missions feel like they take place in the same areas over and over as well, because there are limited unique looking spots which are actually open enough in which to do combat. Yes, the game is absolutely gorgeous to look at from a distance, and it's immensely detailed up close. But naturally, the game dictates that you spend most of your time on top of grey rooftops, perfectly in the middle position, the Goldilocks zone of blandness. The problem of environmental variety is therefore not so easily solved by simply staying in the city itself. This is the biggest disappointment for me in Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League. The only reason I could spend so much time talking about the details in the city at the beginning of the video is because I deliberately went out of my way to see it. The game has quite weak incentives to explore the city in detail intrinsically, and combat actively pushes you away from the city's most interesting areas. In general, the things that you're able to miss make what you do see on your journey that much more special, but in the case of Suicide Squad, what I see in my journey is depression, and I miss out on what is clearly immense hard work in putting together a city where not a single corner is barren of intentional detail. If I had not tried to see everything the game had in order to make this video, I would never have realised the Swiss cheese design of the road networks throughout Metropolis. I would never have seen the neon-washed markets underneath these red towers. And I wouldn't have noticed this airport sitting by the water, filled with cargo to service imports to the financial district. This game's open world is seriously, probably, in the top 5 of the past decade in terms of density of detail, and no one is talking about it. I don't blame anyone for that either, since the gameplay actively sabotages you from discovering this. The result is, unfortunately, an open world which, despite being as detailed as it is, feels like a cynical facsimile of Rocksteady design. The game is a slave to its live service template, putting the loop of missions loot above any moments which make use of Metropolis's dense city design. And it poisons the well for the great art which does exist in the game. But then, on the other side, the lack of variety in the gameplay, missions, and loot means that it also feels like an empty parody of a looter shooter. Every element of the game follows the same path. The whole thing presents as the definition of trend chasing, from the live service implementation to the looter shooter template, the quippy tone, and even the multiverse flavour of the narrative. Hindsight is 2020, I suppose, but in its launch year of 2024, the game is extremely out of place. This is the problem with the exponentially growing development times for AAA games, and it's a problem which permeates the entire industry. Look at the time between releases for some of the largest AAA franchises, and it makes you wonder what parts of the industry are going to crack first under the unsustainable expectations of quality and size. Unfortunately, but unexpectedly, it's the low-rung developers trying to put food on the table who are feeling it the worst. What it means for the games is that market research needs to be predictive and above all safe before being baked into a project early on. The rough edges are sanded off of these types of productions, and it makes the output feel bland. There's such a thing as over-refining. It's frustrating to look at a game like Suicide Squad in that it forces you to ask why Rocksteady didn't learn the lessons from the abundance of almost identical failures before it. Grafting the strong single-player game talent from reputable studios onto live service games has historically never worked. Well, by the time that all of that failure had occurred, it was already too late. The project that became Suicide Squad started development around 2017, before most of the poster child live service failures occurred. Naturally, in response to a disaster like Suicide Squad, people will say, "This stuff needs to stop." But what is this? Often, people just point to similar circumstances, but rarely define what the issue really is. Why are some live service games okay and others aren't? Destiny, for example, has never had to justify its existence. Well, not consistently anyway. And herein lies the juicy nugget for which we've gone through all this effort to study Suicide Squad in the first place. And that is that games from studios known for their focus and quality, which break the rapport built between them and their audience, have no chance of being received well. Look at all of the examples of where the exact same problem has happened. A studio known in the public consciousness for a certain type of game makes something which is essentially a complete 180 with respect to their regular output, and the result is commercial and critical failure. You have Bethesda with Fallout 76, BioWare's Anthem, Crystal Dynamics' Avengers, and Arkane's Redfall. In all of these cases, a studio known for its high production quality single-player games with good to great narratives and worlds at the core of their designs came out with multiplayer-focused, live service, microtransaction-laden releases, and the player base that each of these studios built up over their previous games rejected each on announcement. Now you might be saying, "Pixel Whip, you complete moron. That wasn't the problem, it's that the games were shit." And you'd be right, because yes, these were all convoluted and buggy on release, and they were all met with critical dissent. But here's the thing about live service games. They often rely on a promise that they'll eventually get better, that if you just stick with it for now, one day it'll be good. But because the studios behind these games broke the silent contract between them and their core audience, the discourse around those games becomes extremely negative before even having released, amplifying the negative conversations. What I need to stress here as well is that development studios don't owe gamers anything. If they want to pivot to making soulless cash grabs, that's their prerogative. When they release a good game, players will buy that game with money and the transaction is complete. What they do afterwards is their own business. But the fact of the matter is that if a studio builds their image and marketing on the prestige of their self-contained experiences, audiences will feel as if they're being deceived when that same prestige is used to market games who wear their business model on their sleeve. And it's this perception which tarnishes a game before it even releases by spilling out to the wider market who the games are trying to target. I remember shortly before Arkham put out Redfall, my group of friends, who are mostly extremely casual gamers, knew that game as that one which looks like it's going to be terrible. As CD Projekt Red launched Cyberpunk, my completely non-gamer girlfriend was intimately aware of all the game's problems despite not knowing how to locate the right trigger on a controller. I think many people underestimate how easily sentiment can spread out of the core gaming discourse. So the attempts at making these live service monoliths end up launching unceremoniously to a small initial player base. And of course, as I've discussed with the Suicide Squad, the very premise of telling a traditional, compelling character-focused story within a live service framework is absurd, so people who might otherwise be interested in a similar but self-contained game have little reason to stick around outside of the small audience for whom there might be some gimmick that resonates with them. The result is even more atrophy for that initial player base, one of the most important metrics for a live service's long-term success. So yes, the games in this category were not good at launch, fundamentally, but compiling onto that problem was a situation where no one would want to play the game one way or another because of its optics. And there have been plenty of comeback stories in the past several years which prove that games with good concepts which launch too early can win back audience favour. But this can't happen anywhere near as easily for a live service. A live service game really only even exists insofar as its player base does. So when people say this needs to stop, what this is studios trying to translate their affinity for prestige self-contained experiences onto an unevolved live service template, since it's an approach that players simply and fairly reject. Oh, and not making the game shit helps too, I suppose. Otherwise, as much as you might want a slice of that delicious Fortnite pie, there's still no way for projects like these to even have a chance at competing in the most competitive corner of the industry. So the natural next question is, of course, will this bullshit finally stop now? We have enough live services trying to monopolize our time to last a millennium, and we don't need to see any more reputable studios fall down the financial rabbit hole of the live service carrot on a stick. Well, I'm sorry to say that my take on this is quite cynical. Market forces are pulling a lot of studios in this direction despite the constant failure because of the massive reward in the risk-reward equation. But that equation is being solved by upper managers who clearly don't know all the variables, and in which the variables are largely unknowable to begin with. What makes it even harder is that it's not as simple of a problem as it looks. A lot of conversations about Suicide Squad seem to conclude with people denouncing the publisher, WB Studios, for supposedly forcing Rocksteady into making this game. But all reports and evidence about its development point to Rocksteady being, at minimum, equally responsible for the choice to make the game the way that it is. People like a nice easy story without any pesky nuance to worry about, so that they can just point to a bad guy and be done with it. It's certainly the more satisfying answer, but the truth is that even the most respected of studios are capable of making mistakes, sometimes very stupid ones. Everyone is human, and financial incentives, while most influential at the top end, can still manage to sway the decisions at the source. A similar issue occurred with BioWare's Anthem, but even today, many people solely blame EA. I'm not an apologist for publishers by any means, but the truth is important, and the reality is that a solution to the problem is equally complicated. The issue is a lot more than just greedy publishers. It's a much wider and more intangible pull on the direction of the industry as a whole, as unsatisfying of an answer that is. Someone much smarter than me would be needed to really explain the full depth of this phenomenon. And if we're taking bets on whether another Suicide Squad / Avengers / Redfall situation will happen again, I suggest you listen to WB's CEO, David Zaslav, on the company's plan for future video games. In a recent earnings call, he's quoted saying to investors, quote, "Our focus is on transforming our biggest franchises from largely console and PC based with 3-4 year release schedules to include more always-on gameplay through live services, multi-platform, and free-to-play extensions, with a goal to have more players spending more time on more platforms. Ultimately, we want to drive engagement and monetization of longer cycles and at higher levels. We see significant opportunity to generate greater post-purchase revenue." End quote. This comes after the catastrophically abysmal failure of Suicide Squad, who, let's do the quick Steam player count update. Yikes. It's not doing well. Not only that, but the most recent WB earnings call as of the time of writing this script has David Zaslav blaming Suicide Squad directly for contributing to the company's quarterly financial losses. If that sounds like reason enough to stop pursuing this cursed numbers game, think about the fact that WB's interest in more live service design comes in the face of one of their own games, Hogwarts Legacy, a focused, single-player experience becoming the best-selling game of 2023. Even an 8-year-old should be able to put 2 and 2 together here, but no doubt all of the suits at WB headquarters are instead jizzing their pants at the thought of having that game monetize your time as well. I will be very surprised if this is even close to the last time we see this mistake happen. Having said all of this, I also consider myself an optimist. The upside is that the gaming audience at large rejects these games outright. This is horrible for the people whose art gets wasted on games like Suicide Squad, but the problem would only be worse if it weren't for the precedent of massive failure. Imagine what the landscape would look like if all of these games didn't have such a public defeat. And as for the future of Suicide Squad, it's not dying, it is dead. And on fire, and sinking, as everyone peers over the fence to see what its convulsing body will do next. In May 2024, there is no evidence that the game has sold well given its budget. No one is even currently playing the damn thing. The weekly developer updates feel like they're just being shouted into a void. What will happen is that the game is supported for the minimum amount of contractually obliged time, if that. I'm doubtful we'll see the Justice League return for more narrative, despite that work having already been partially complete, even though, personally, I would like to see what the full extent of the story would have been. You know, watching this whole situation play out with Rocksteady, I was reminded of an interview with Sefton Hill, the creative director of the Arkham games and now Suicide Squad. It was the week before the extremely hyped up release of Arkham City in 2011, and he was asked about whether he felt any pressure given the massive acclaim from Arkham Asylum several years earlier. He said, quote, "I'm firmly of the belief you have to make the game you want to play, then other people see and feel that passion when they play it. I don't believe in second guessing what the mass market want. Maybe that works for some people, but it's never worked for me." End quote. How's that for some retrospective irony? It's possible I'm romanticizing the past a little too much, but those games presented like a AAA passion project, or at least as close as you can get to that. The team at Rocksteady just believed in their work. Jump forward to the lead up to Suicide Squad's release, and Rocksteady co-founders Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker left the studio to establish a new startup. There was no celebratory lead up to the game from its core designers, and no follow-through across its release. While this is most likely little more than a personal choice to move over to a blank canvas, the unwavering commitment to one's own work just doesn't exist for Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League. If Arkham Asylum had the vibe of a AAA passion project, Suicide Squad just feels like corporate poison. Unfortunately, I expect to see more studios fall in a similar way before it gets better. It's simply not possible to just pull the more monetization lever on top of an existing single-player formula. For a game which monetizes your time to remain compelling in the long term, the approach requires the right type of game to work, and by extension, to even be accepted by a player base at all. You can't tell a story if the narrative can't have an ending. You can't let players appreciate the details in your world if the mission design is trying to pull you in a loop of loot. And if everything is beholden to the market research of 8 years ago, the likelihood you've predicted correctly won't be high, and the result will likely be something stale and derivative. It feels like the solution is obvious: just stop making these kinds of games. But the fact that the return on investment is in principle infinite in a game which monetizes your time, the incentive to fund self-contained experiences is only becoming weaker. The best we can do as consumers is spend our money on the things we want to see more of. Looking beyond that, I do hope that once the necessary criticism towards the retention-optimized business model of Suicide Squad passes, people reflect on a more nuanced legacy for the game. Yes, it almost certainly deserves its public condemnation, but there's some great work beneath the surface. I really enjoy the performances from the game's cast. I genuinely loved all of the detail in the character design, and I care about the work that was put into the world of Metropolis. What I hope for is that after the ship has finally finished sinking, that we start seeing some appreciation for the work which was undermined by the game's own disjointed and cynical design.